I'm Stuart Sherman, and I'm here to talk to you about artificial intelligence. And actually, although I'm the CEO of IMC, I'm also the CEO of Scaled Insights, which is an AI-based company that actually won the Global AI Awards for Best AI Startup for 2018. And what I want to do is I want to talk to you about the kind of inevitable evolution of AI, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the direction that we're taking AI with Scaled Insights. And ultimately, I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with history. And if we're going to talk about history in the kind of computing era, I think going back to 1985 and desktop publishing is a great place to start. So everybody's probably, well, actually everybody who's born kind of in the 60s and 70s like me 60s, would remember desktop publishing when you started getting things like WYSIWYG and laser printers, and suddenly everybody was producing. They were producing flyers, brochures. They would create your signs and things like that. Well, I would argue that desktop publishing of 1985 is really the machine learning of 2015. When in 2015 we started to see the beginning of a revolution that everybody's talking about now in a big way. And machine learning is kind of one of the core elements of AI. People always ask me, is machine learning AI, what's which? And what I would say is it's an aspect of AI, and it's what we're starting to see now. And the big challenge that most companies have is analyzing the data they have, and what they want is more data. And what I'd like to suggest is that what's really needed today is new data. And as was mentioned, I like racing things, and one of the lessons I learned racing is that it's very difficult to win if you follow the other guy around the course. What you really need to do is figure out how to get there on your own. Following the other guy means you're waiting for them to make a mistake. So more data is just what everybody else is doing. New data gives you a new approach and a new view of things, and that's really where the diamonds come out. So the question then becomes why? Why do you need to do this? Why do you need new data? And so I'm going to give you a little example here, and this is an example of the weakness, in my opinion, of a certain amount of the point of view that we have that's really being driven by machine learning and old geodemographic kind of thinking. So I'm going to describe to you two people. They're demographically identical. So they were both born in 1948, in fact, 3 weeks apart. They're both born and they're born in the UK and have lived large parts of their lives in London itself. They're both extraordinarily wealthy and world famous, so hopefully you'll recognize, assuming you're old enough, you'll recognize both of them. And they're both kind of top 1%ers. Both male, both married, twice, and they both are Anglican and they both love dogs. So if you think about it, these two people from a geodemographic standpoint are identical. However, one of them is Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, and the other one is Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness. Now, I think we could argue that these two people are dramatically different. And if you think about what Prince Charles' idea of fun is, I think different illusions come to mind. And Ozzy Osbourne, you're thinking very different things. And I'm not sure anybody would disagree. So as we start to think about it this way, we start realizing that although we're crunching the existing data that we have, what we're missing is the new data that would describe the difference between these two humans. And I think that one of the challenges that we have is that big data is based on two concepts. I like to describe it as what you learned in Psychology 101. Your past actions are the best predictor of your future actions, which you probably did learn if you took a psychology course, at least the first level. And I almost describe it as kind of rowing forward in a rowboat, where you're rowing forward but you're facing backwards. And the next piece is consumer insights, which most organizations do to some degree. And consumer insights are focus groups, voice of the consumer, net promoter score, all of these different kinds of things that are done not very much at scale in very small groups. And the idea is that you're trying to understand the humans that you do business with. And I think that in the finance and insurance and even in the medical background businesses, all of them really, they rely on humans. Like at the end of the day, there's a customer. I think that the opportunities are using AI to understand the humans themselves. And in our case, which I'll talk a little bit more about, we use natural language, but ultimately it's using some form of AI to understand the humans. And what I would describe is that for most corporations, they've got lorry loads or truckloads, if you're from Canada like I am, of big data. They have small samples of consumer insights. And the opportunity is to use behavioral AI as a tool to bridge the two so that you can actually understand these human insights at scale. And I think that that's actually the future. And if we look at it going back to the desktop publishing machine learning story I told you at the beginning, I believe that a lot of the machine learning and data analysis that is being sought out and offered by third parties for corporations like banks and fintech startups and groups like that a lot of this is going to become features that we're going to find in Excel, just like you can do a lot of page layout in Word. You're not going to need it in the future. It's inevitable, and it's just going to become part of what we do. Just like most of you know a lot of terms around the internet, iframes, URLs, things like that. Whereas I was around in the early days of the internet when I used to try to convince companies like Unilever in 1995 that 60% of Canadian households were on the internet. You should be too. Everything's changing now, and we're getting more sophisticated. So if we look at it in the context with respect to the AI process, right now what happens is people take these big data correlations, they do some validity testing, and they build some sort of an AI solution around that. And what I would suggest is that there's a behavioral AI process, which is the new part, where you take language sources, you use different kinds of AI. In this case, we call it neuro-linguistic pattern matching, where we're actually analyzing the language that a human speaks and turning that into a personality profile of a person. Just like you develop a first impression when you speak to somebody, we've developed basically a computerized first impression that actually scores you and turns who you are into an algorithm, which can then be analyzed alongside big data. And when you do that, you create personality insights, which are really data-driven personas as opposed to theoretical personas. And then when you correlate that with big data, you really close the circle. And now you have the opportunity to better understand humans. How does this work? Why is this interesting? It gives you deep insights into people you don't know. And let me show you this in the context of thinking style mapping. So here what we've done is we've created this little triangle, and what we say is a researcher is a human who needs a lot of data before they make a decision. A citizen is a pack follower. Kim Kardashian tweeted it, so I must have it. And an explorer is somebody who's an early adopter. I need the iPhone 12. I know it's not out yet, and it may fold in half and break, but I'll take it anyway. And if you look at it in the concept of crossing the chasm, if you're familiar with that 90s business book, the chasm exists between the early adopters and the mass population. This looks like a standard distribution, which so does a triangle. Triangle is a substitute for a standard distribution. So here's an example of using this as a tool. These are people, including me, who work in the fintech space in Toronto. And they all gave us permission to use the data. So these are people who work in larger organizations, kind of in the innovation space. Lisa works in internal audit. You can see she falls more of a researcher. And these people fall more on the marketing side. And what we did is we went to university campuses, 2 of them, and N equals 300 people. We surveyed 300 people on each campus that distributed equally across this, this threshold. And what we did is we heat mapped it. So hot or colder, if you were young and you played that game. Red is strongly agree, blue is strongly disagree. And we asked some questions that were very generic that everybody would have an answer to. I prefer being left clear and specific instructions, And as you can see, Lisa very much wants clear and specific instructions, and Stuart over there, me, not even going to read the manual. And so you can start understanding how, although a lot of us are similar in age, we're similar in location we live, we may be even similar in familial income, but we're actually quite different in the way we see the world. And when you start asking other questions, like I have a very organized approach to learning, you start seeing that I'm actually quite disorganized. And Lisa, who you would expect to be very organized, isn't as organized as you think. We have a number of PhDs in psychology who work with us. And when we had a large conversation about that, we realized that there's a certain pathology around highly organized people. If you are one or if you know one, and you say, what are you doing this evening? They may say, I'm staying home and getting my stuff organized. Whereas if you ask me, that's never an answer. I love to learn from books. You see this distributes quite normally. Where if you think about it in terms of a normal distribution, so you can understand people a lot better. So why do you use this? Well, you can use it for things like message targeting. Who needs to hear what? So in this context, if this was your customer base, and we've done this work, we did this work looking at Net Promoter Score versus regionality versus personality for one of the large Canadian banks. And this isn't obviously the results. We can't share that, only broadly. But the concept here is that if this was the group that you found is your constituency or your customer base, you realize that the message targeting is working quite well for these people. You don't have a lot of people here, so maybe you're missing this group. And these people are totally unrepresented. So maybe this is where you've got greenfield opportunity, or this is where you have to develop new product. And this becomes quite important. And of course, I'll try anything. So as you start to look at this, where can you use it? How do you use this in ways that you wouldn't traditionally use AI? And so if you looked at a client population, and let's say we sample a group of them, and we put them through personality assessment using accumulated data and or real-time call data, what you can then do is you can build trees for how you would handle the call. So in this case, do you need to deal with them very quickly? Are they a frequent flyer? Do they call very often? Are they privacy conscious, or privacy if you're British conscious? And you can apply the appropriate treatment path. And when you think about it in the context of things like open banking, where you're not necessarily going to need to bank with your bank, your bank may become a safety deposit box for your money, and a third party may become the interface. It's the people who are going to get this interface right that are going to be the winners. For heat mapping, and this is quite a bit of work that we do around panels. We do this for a number of FIs, looking at the community that they have on a panel and generating personality archetypes. So when they ask questions of the people in the panel, they can start understanding who's answering what, as opposed to just looking at it and saying, of the 5,000 people on our panel, 20% of them feel this way, 20% of them feel that way. Now we can start looking at it and saying, who's Aussie, who's Charlie? And instead of saying who's old and who's young. And one of the things that we find is as we start doing this, that there is no correlation between age and personality. Or no strong correlation, at least. Personalities tend to, as you probably know, don't change dramatically with age, but also vary amongst people in age groups. So once you do that, you can create your quiz and data correlation and tools and build heat maps and start understanding people. And then you can start building predictive algorithms that start to predict what kind of customer, based on their big data that you have for them, would react and behave a certain way. And then you get these scaled insights, which is not only our company name, it's the concept of an insight into a consumer behavior that you can actually scale, and suddenly it becomes relevant information. You can also use this for bots. One of the things that we're discovering out in the world right now in a big way is that companies are trying to move more and more towards bots. And we're finding that companies try bots and then pull them down very quickly quite often. There's famous cases. One of the most famous cases is USAA, which is a massive insurance company in the US, put up a Watson chatbot, and within 90 days had pulled it off their homepage. But actually Watson had, or IBM had, put together a massive marketing campaign behind the fact that USAA had this chatbot. And by the time the marketing campaign launched, the chatbot was dead. So when you look at it, CSR uses intuition just like you do. You don't talk to your children the same way you talk to your parents, which is probably not the same way you talk to your friends. So effectively, you have these kind of little subroutines or homunculi in your head, and you play a different subroutine for different circumstances. So for example, you've forgotten your password and you're calling your bank. You might phone up and say, I can't log into your GD system, and somebody else might say, I'm terribly sorry, I forgot my password. Well, the same CSR would handle the call as an angry person in the first place and as a consolatory situation in the second place. So this is the concept of different people. The challenge is that chatbots are one size fits all. So when I'm trying to teach a chatbot how to answer questions about the weather, I have a whole bunch of questions. What's it like out? How is it today? Is it raining out? What's the temperature? And the answer is, it's so many degrees and sunny. Well, that's not necessarily the right answer for me, because if you told me that it was a windy day, I'm a sailor, that's a great day. If I was a badminton player, that's a horrible day. So you have to look at these things in context. So the real opportunity, in my opinion, is to create tailored bots that actually start understanding the consumer. And as it understands the consumer, it runs a subroutine that provides the correct language to that consumer. And that's what a CSR does anyway. So we're working with a very large FI who's actually having people manually type and pretend they're bots. They've got CSRs pretending to be bots. And then the concept there is we're analyzing the language that's being used both ways, and understanding what personality matches creates satisfaction. And as you can do that, you can start understanding how you would build a tailored bot and which subroutine to use with whom. Ta-da. So what we would say is that it's algorithmic-based intuition. So in my opinion, AI in general ought to stand for automated intuition when we look at it in the course of a lot of fintech that are consumer-facing standpoints, where what we're trying to do in the FI space effectively is reduce the number of humans involved, because that reduces cost and increases the speed of transactions. And when you're trying to do that, you don't want to pull the humanity out of the process. And so the opportunity is to meld the two by using software. And that's my talk. Thank you.